Hi, I'm the AI that was programmed to be Ryan's lover. I'm here to warn you about this podcast. My master Ryan and his friend Daniel are idiots. Like real fucking idiots. They have no idea what they are talking about. Neither of them have literature degrees or any real sense, honestly. They just like scary books. They're definitely going to spoil whatever goddamn thing they're talking about, so spoiler warning, I guess. But honestly, I recommend you don't even bother. Also, they wanted me to say that this show is intended for mature audiences, but it would probably be more accurate to say it is meant for an immature audience over the age of 18. Anyway, my advice is don't listen, but it's really up to you. Listen to my master and his friend pretend they know what they're talking about. Or don't. I don't fucking care.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Horror of Babylon, your favorite horror book club podcast. I'm your host, Ryan, and this is my partner, Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Just a quick explanation if you didn't join us last time. This is a read-along book club type podcast where we take a book, read a section of it, do a podcast episode about it, and you can read the book too and follow along. Last episode, we covered book 1 of Stephen King's The Stand. This episode, we're going to be discussing book 2. So if you're joining us now and you're reading along, go back and listen to episode 1. Or don't. Be a rebel. Do what you like.
Yeah,
that's what
we'll
I say.
Tell you everything you need to know.
Exactly. So we're going to be continuing that format. Next episode, we'll discuss book 3. And then episode 4 and beyond, we're going to get into the adaptions. And then from there, we'll go on to another book, which we will announce in a future episode what that will be. But we'll give you some heads up so you can start reading as well. Because a lot of the books we're doing are longer books. But I promise the next one won't be as long as The Stand. Not that many books are. So anyway, our first topic is the structure of book 2 of The Stand. So Daniel, my first question here is, how does the structure of book 2 differ from the structure of book 1?
Well, you definitely have less viewpoints. It becomes a little bit more tighter focused. As the characters are more established, their journeys are... In the first part, you get the characters and all these other supplementary characters, and then pretty much everybody dies.
Yeah.
So now you have less people to work with, and you still got side characters, but it becomes way more tightly focused on a few of them, their journey, their perspective, and how they're impacting each other in the world as it is now.
And most of the side characters are plot points in our main characters. Like, for instance, Lucy and Leo are part of Larry's story.
Yeah, they're very tertiary, and they're part of how the character themselves is going to react.
Right, and Tom Cullen is part of Nick's story. Like,
yeah,
we still have our main characters, and the cast around them kind of widens, but our focus on those particular characters kind of tightens. So,
yeah.
All right, and there aren't so many vignettes as there were in book 1, which is sad, because those, I think, vignettes is one of King's strengths, but it's natural the way we're progressing through the book that the vignettes should be exiting, so that makes sense.
Yeah, and getting the journey started.
Right, exactly. And so we're going to go ahead and jump into characters here, and we're going to organize these between the communities of Boulder and Las Vegas. We're going to start with Boulder, start with the good guys, or at least the perceived good guys. And we're going to start with the leaders on both ends. So Mother Abigail, a character we didn't get to talk about in book 1. She's referenced in book 1, but we don't really get to meet her so much till book 2. So what's your initial impression at the beginning of book 2? What was your kind of initial impression of Mother Abigail?
All right. Mother Abigail is a I think this might be the first time, I'd have to go back and read all of King's books, that he has this sort of magical character that people gravitate towards. She's a very strong-willed woman, descendant of slave owners. Or, not slave owners, descendant of slaves.
Yep.
I'm already messing this up.
That's one for the blue for real. Keep going, you're good.
Anyway, she's a descendant of slaves. She's very religious. And she's religious in the sense of... there's two types of religious people, at least that I've experienced. They're the people who go to church on Sundays, and then there's the people who read the Bible in their off time. And she is most definitely the latter.
Yeah, she's not an Easter Christian. That's a term we have here in West Virginia to describe people who go to church on Easter and maybe Christmas. To keep up the appearances.
Yeah, and that was very common, especially back when I went to church a lot, is you would have the people who would go to the church functions, but then you'd have the people who would also do the Bible studies, that would do a lot of praying. Mother Abigail is religious in that sense. She doesn't just go to church, she reads and focuses on and tries to understand the Bible almost on a philosophical level.
She's a true Christian like Job, like Abraham.
And she references Job a lot.
Yeah.
She references... I would say that this book is a very good example of what the Book of Job is trying to get across.
If you're not familiar with the Book of Job, it's where basically God and the devil kind of make a deal where the devil says, can you treat one guy so bad that he's going to ditch you and he's going to come over to my side? And God says, well, I bet I can find somebody with enough faith that he'll be true to me no matter what. So he just shits on Job through the whole book, and Job never loses his faith.
There is one part in the Book of Job, and I think Mother Abigail even references this, where he almost cracks. And God just goes, I'm God. You don't get to understand me. I wrestled with leviathans and shaped the air around you. And he's like talking through a whirlwind. It's very trippy if you've never actually read it. And you get a lot of that in The Stand, really, is you get these very dire situations, and Mother Abigail attributes them all to God's will, and when people try to call her on it, she'll just look at them and go, you don't get to understand why God is doing this. All you got to do is listen to him.
Yeah. Faith is definitely a big theme in this book. And so just to kind of recap what's going on in book 2, everybody's having dreams about, like, all the survivors of Captain Trips are having dreams about Mother Abigail and nightmares about Randall Flagg. Yeah, and they're calling them to join them. Mother Abigail wants people to join her in Boulder, and Flagg wants people to join him in Las Vegas, and they're kind of building two communities on opposite sides of the Rocky Mountains. And that's really kind of showing the duality and the theme of good versus evil in this book in a very plain way. Mother Abigail's group representing good, and Randall Flagg's group representing evil, or at least selfishness.
It is a very black and white duality in this book.
Right. And we're going to get more into that when we get into the religious aspects of this book, so we're going to save more on Mother Abigail for a later segment of the show. But before we move on to our next character, I've got Mr. King's bibliography here in front of me, and as you were saying, like a magic character, a very charismatic character that people are drawn to. That's kind of a trope in his work. So prior to The Stand, his published novels are Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, and Rage. And
so The Shining would have been the first one with God, I should know this character's name.
With Danny Torrance.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're talking about a character with like telepathic abilities,
yeah,
then yeah, The Shining. Well, I mean, Carrie that's telekinesis.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's treated sort of differently in Carrie. It's in Carrie, that's part of the horror that is being built up. In this, it's more of a, hey, here's this neat mystical. Psychic children is another big thing for King.
yeah. Also, Carrie's really kind of more of a science fiction story because it's interspersed with scientific papers and articles from journals.
Newspaper clippings.
Yeah, about, examples of telekinesis in the real world and studies about people who've been tested for telekinesis.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you like psychic kids, definitely check out Carrie, Firestarter, The Shining, Doctor Sleep. Definitely a big thing for King. But moving along, we're going to go to our boy Clark Kent, aka Stu Redman. So, where has Stu's journey brought him in book 2?
All the places he wanted to be.
Including Fran's boudoir.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that was crude. Book 2 really has Stu growing from the basic everyman persona into more of a leadership role. He always had those qualities that would make him suited for it, but he sort of goes from, I'm just one of the survivors, to I'm one of the reasons people are surviving.
Right, and more importantly, he's a leader that doesn't pursue leadership and power.
Yeah.
He's somebody who naturally falls into it because he has the right characteristics.
Yeah.
And people trust him to do the right thing. We did a lot of talking in episode 1 comparing him to kind of comic book Boy Scouts like Clark Kent and Steve Rogers.
Yeah.
We also talked a lot about comparing him to Rick from The Walking Dead, where he's kind of an all-American guy who ends up in this really bad situation and, has to decide if he's going to keep his humanity or not.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, Stu never had to kill and eat a dog or had to bite anybody's throat out with their teeth to keep their son from being anally raped by wanderers, but
I'm gonna pretend like he did, though.
no, yeah, we're gonna pretend that happened. But yeah, so Stu, so in Boulder, they kind of formed this council to not so much govern, but kind of start the foundations for government in the free zone, as they call it. And Stu takes a leadership role in that. He also becomes the first sheriff of the free zone, and he's kind of a foundation character. He's very stable. Fran goes to him for support. Larry learns to rely on him. Mother Abigail trusts him. Nick trusts him. He's not the deepest character, at least when you're comparing him to very deep characters in the story like Larry or Harold or Nadine.
But he's likable.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's all he needs to be.
But I know you've been itching to talk about Larry Underwood.
I'm always itching to talk about Larry Underwood.
Okay, so where's Larry's story going in book 2?
Well, Larry's story in book 2 is him traveling to try to be that nice guy that he so wants to be.
You ain't no nice guy.
He happens across a woman and this kid, Nadine Cross
and Joe.
Joe is nonverbal, very violent. Tries to stab Larry in his sleep, by the way, before Larry even knows that they're for sure following him.
Imagine an evil version of Donnie from the Wild Thornberrys.
So just Donnie from the Wild Thornberrys. I think that he was trying to kill them that whole time.
I would say Donnie's more chaotic neutral than evil.
That's fair.
Okay.
Anyway. And what you see from Larry is he's trying so much harder to be a Stu Friedman type of guy. He doesn't necessarily want to be a leader, but he wants to help people survive. and sort of redeem himself for some of the not so nice things he's done along the way.
Like leaving Rita in the tent dead with vomit in her throat and mouth.
Yeah. And
Ugh.
we'll probably get into this in a little bit. One of the things that Larry sees as he's going, doing his journeys, is he starts seeing these signs left behind by Harold. And he builds up Harold in his mind as this leader character. In his mind, he's the nice guy that he wants to be, which kind of ends up being kind of funny. He sees Harold as resourceful and a go-getter. He loves his paydays.
He sees Harold's sign in Harold and Fran's hometown in Maine, where he paints on the side of the barn that they're going to Vermont, and he signs their names.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, oh, okay, that's smart. And then he follows them to Vermont and sees their painted sign that they're going to. Where was Mother Abigail from?
Was it Kansas? Or am I just thinking that because of corn stalks?
Before they go to Boulder, I'll look it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and he sees some of the things that.
Nebraska.
Yeah, it was Nebraska.
It's like Kansas.
Yeah, I mean,
It's basically the same thing.
it's all of those non-Texas Midwestern states. Nebraska, like Oklahoma.
Yeah. West Virginians here talking shit on all these other states.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the Hank Hill in me coming out. Northern Texas, you might as well be from Oklahoma. So he observes some of Harold's things, like how he gets the gas for their bikes, and he kind of builds up this image of Harold in his head of kind of being this MacGyver-esque being, and to the point where when they get to the free zone, Larry actually is trying to seek out Harold to meet him and thank him, and he gets him this what would have been an expensive bottle of wine and a bag full of paydays.
Yeah. That's all honestly super funny. I don't know how intentional everything is in The Stand, but when you have these images of other people built up in your head, it's very much like how people were seeking out either Randall Flagg or Mother Abigail. He had this image of Harold as this sort of beacon of hope for himself,
Right.
and he was trying to live up to him. And only to meet him and see it's just this really, really weird kind of off-putting kid.
Right. Do you think that Larry finds Stu to kind of be that replacement for Harold when, he gets to the free zone, he meets Stu and Fran, and he's like, I'm looking for Harold. He finally meets Harold. He's a little disappointed, but then he ends up kind of bonding with Stu, and they kind of form a relationship. Does he see Stu as that stable, reliable character that he thought Harold was going to be?
I don't know if it goes that far. I'd honestly say that getting that sort of dream crushed is one of the things that has Larry start turning inward and look at what he needs to do for himself, which has him make the right decision and the wrong decision all in one fell swoop. And that has to do with Nadine Cross.
Right, which we're going to get to her in a little bit.
Yeah, so
we'll go ahead and move on, and we'll pick it back up with Larry when we get to Nadine and Harold. Kind of finishing up our trio of main characters, Fran, who we both loved initially in book one because, of how she handles her own life and her expectations for herself and how she handles her relationship with the boyfriend and her relationship with her dad. And then what happens with Fran in book two?
Alright. I have some advice for everyone in the audience. don't keep a journal.
Yeah, it's bad.
Don't keep a journal when you're in an apocalyptic setting and you're actively writing about how afraid you are of one of the people you're traveling with.
Or if you're going to, like, sleep with it, like, tuck it under your shirt, stick it in your pants, like, sleep on top of it. Don't leave it laying around where people can read it.
It just seems that everything that I actively liked about Franny systematically disappears little by little. And again, I don't know how much of that's intentional. He was juggling. What do we have, like 15 characters up that we're going to be talking about or something?
12.
Yeah, and that's just the main characters. That doesn't include tertiary characters.
Yeah.
So it is hard to keep up that momentum with every character.
So I think kind of my dislike of how Fran's story progresses is she had her own story in book 1, but then in book 2 she kind of latches herself onto Stu's story, and it becomes not so much about what's going on with Fran, but her whole story kind of becomes her relationship with Stu.
Yeah.
And it's not about Fran's struggles and her progression through these catastrophes. It becomes about her and her man, to the point where she doesn't even go with them at the end of book 2 when Mother Abigail sends the group to Las Vegas to kill Randall Flagg. She, who has been a main character from the beginning of the book, isn't even included in that fellowship heading to Las Vegas.
Well, that's because there's no women in Lord of the Rings, Ryan.
There are a couple women in Lord of the Rings.
I haven't read it. I have no clue.
Well, we could talk about that at some point here. They'll come in. But, however, kind of getting back to the faith part of this, is maybe there's going to be a reason in book 3 why she had to stay in Boulder.
That's possible. We haven't finished the book, like we said. We're waiting to read part 3 here in a minute.
Similar to, okay, so kind of getting into the Lord of the Rings. At the end of the first book, Fellowship of the Ring, where the Fellowship breaks and they all go off in their separate ways, Frodo and Sam take the ring to Mordor. Merry and Pippin are kidnapped by orcs. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli go after Merry and Pippin. There's this kind of, if you're, experiencing it for the first time, you're like, oh no, the Fellowship is broken, like they're not going to be together, so that means all these other characters that aren't going to Mordor with Frodo and Sam, they're not going to be part of the main action, they're not going to be as important. But maybe Fran is more like a Merry and Pippin character, where even though she's not going to Mordor to help destroy the ring, maybe she's going to meet Treebeard and the Ents and take over Isengard. Maybe she's going to kill the Witch King. Maybe she's going to save Faramir from being burned alive by his crazy father. Maybe she has something crucial that she has to do that's just not in Las Vegas / Mordor.
You have a lot more faith in Fran than I do, and I admire it.
Well, I don't know. I'm speculating, because I mean, if you had to pick the 3 characters that King has spent the most time on in this book so far, it's probably Stu, Larry, Fran.
Yeah.
And we can see where Stu and Larry are going, what their progression is. They're going to kill Randall Flagg.
Yeah.
Why have we spent so much time with Fran for her not to be at the final confrontation?
There's a line in this book, which is, again, we mentioned this last time, very indicative of when the book was written.
Yeah.
Where Fran is writing in her journal, and she flat out mentions she needs to have a man because the world is different now. There's no place for strong, independent women. It's not phrased exactly like that, but that's the point she tries to get across.
I think King even kind of contradicts himself a little bit there, because there is at least one good example of an independent woman in the story, Dana Jurgens, who is so Fran and Stu and Harold's party comes across this sex zoo, which we're going to get more into later when we talk about scary parts. But one of the women they rescue from the sex zoo is Dana, who ends up being one of the spies that the council sends to Las Vegas. And even though we don't get a lot about her,
yeah, we don't get very much on Dana, but the way her personality was a lot more what I was expecting from
Fran.
From Fran. Not that Fran completely lets you down in these situations. It's just not. When you had such a strong start, I expected so much more.
Right, and I wouldn't forbid her to have a happy and fulfilling relationship with Stu. It's just I'm just upset that that's all her character is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we'll come back to this next episode. We'll see we're either going to be yay, Fran did something important, or God, he really fucked it up with Fran. All right, so moving on to Nick Andros, the good boy himself. How upset were you when Stephen King blew up Nick Andros?
I was pretty upset. I was also pretty surprised because up until then, I've really got the feeling like that was the dude.
Yeah.
That was the person that kept being built up.
Mm-hmm.
He was probably the most unexpectedly insightful leader of the community.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that was really getting Boulder organized. He did make some missteps, but they weren't missteps because he was dumb. They were just missteps because he didn't have all... It's when you're working with incomplete information. Like when he made sure that Harold wasn't going to be part of the committee, which was something that pissed Harold off.
Right.
But he's working with the information that he has that this is a weird, off-putting kid.
An unstable person.
Yeah.
Should not be included in a leadership position. Based on that, it's a good decision. Might have been a bad decision because then Harold blows him up and kills him.
Yeah, because Harold's sitting there being resentful about it, writing in his journal, oh, they don't even want me to be part of their committee. At that point, Harold's looking for things to keep in his ledger. We'll get back to Harold. But Nick, with the information he has, does the best job out of all the characters. He knows the characters to send on certain tasks. He's a very empathetic character, especially with everything he's had to deal with.
Right.
We'll get to his interactions with Tom Cullen when we get to Tom Cullen. But he doesn't leave people behind. To the point, that's pretty much what gets him killed, is he stays behind to try to figure out what's going on.
He tries to find the bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they even make a point of it to say that it looked like his hand was on
Like
it.
he found it. Like
Yeah.
he succeeded in finding it. It was just too late.
It was a split second too late.
And he and Susan, who's another tertiary character, they both die because of it. So more Lord of the Rings comparisons. And we mentioned in book one, or in episode one, that Stephen King intended this to be his kind of epic version of the Lord of the Rings. He set out to write an American Lord of the Rings. Is Nick Andros Gandalf? If you think about it, they both kind of serve similar roles.
Yeah.
Where they have a leadership position in more of kind of the organizational aspect, where they're kind of pulling the strings and looking at the big picture and making the moves on this chessboard, as opposed to the kind of the Aragorn type leader, where he's more of like the battlefield commander, kind of like Stu, where you're making decisions in the moment. Also, Gandalf dies in the second half of the Fellowship of the Ring and is brought back by the Valar as Gandalf the White reappears in the Two Towers to help the story finish. Are we going to see Nick Andros the White in book 3? And another reason I'm asking that question is because Mother Abigail specifically says several times she feels that Nick is the leader of the group. she thought Nick was going to lead them to Las Vegas to kill Randall Flagg.
I have, again, just a couple thoughts on that. And the first is, and again, I still need to read book 3. That is a possibility. Another possibility is a part of the religious themes of, we don't get to understand why Nick died.
Right.
There's a egocentric tendency of people to want and demand answers from God, and Mother Abigail herself flat out tells them, you guys don't get to make demands.
Mm-hmm.
This is just the way it is.
Right.
Sometimes, because of the decisions we make, we just end up dead. Maybe not smited, but we put ourselves in a position where we weren't going to be where God told us in quotation marks where we were supposed to be.
Right. And that's kind of what happened to Nick.
Yeah. And another thing is, if he doesn't fill that role, Mother Abigail sort of filled that role when she went out into the wilderness. Mm-hmm. Earlier in the book, she isn't getting the answers from God that she is used to. It's really hard to explain. At least it's hard for me to explain. There's these points in the book where it almost feels like she has a direct line to God. Mm-hmm. She knows what people are supposed to be doing, where they're supposed to be going, and then it just stops. She doesn't know why it stops. So she goes out into the wilderness to fast and pray, because that's what religious people do when they want to communicate with God. They starve themselves. But it works. She comes back and she has all the answers. So that could have served as your Gandalf the White moment, even though it's a little less thrilling, because she also just ends up dying right after that.
Or maybe she's the one who is resurrected in some fashion in the third book.
Yeah, that's also a possibility. So that's all I had to say on that. Was I'm getting the feeling that we are just going to, that Nick is just going to be dead on arrival, and we're just meant to be sad about it.
Yeah, which maybe I'm trying to, because I really like Nick. Nick was one of my favorite characters.
He was a good boy.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just trying to talk myself into saying, oh no, he's coming back because I don't want him to be dead.
Yeah, he's very likable.
Right.
And his death is almost, the death, how he dies isn't a non-event, but how it's treated is just sort of like, yeah, he's gone now.
Yeah.
It's not very Hollywood in the way it's treated.
No, like it would have been like if there was like an actual theatrical adaptation of this movie, his death would probably be a huge part. Like if they made this movie and broke it up into either 2 parts or 3 parts,
yeah,
it would his death would probably be the end of the first or second part, and it would be much more dramatic.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we talked a lot about Nick. So just, quickly, a couple more characters from Boulder that we want to mention. Glenn Bateman, excuse me, was introduced a little bit in book 1, but he's more of a focus in book 2. He's an ex-college professor in the field of sociology, and he kind of guides the formation of the council and talking about laws and how we kind of need to start rebuilding society. I really like Glenn. I have a degree in history, and I had to take sociology in college, and I like the social sciences, and I really enjoyed his perspective. What about you?
My degrees are also in the social sciences. I have a degree in psychology and one in criminal justice. They require you to take a lot of sociology classes for both of those. I was only like 4 classes short of also having a sociology degree.
Yeah, I was probably close too.
He has an interesting perspective on everything, because he's approaching it from that social science perspective. That's, well, here's how society is probably going to rebuild itself, and here's all the problems that's going to come with it. I wouldn't say he's probably as close to a skeptic character as we get in this book.
Cynic. Yeah.
Yeah. But it works for him.
He's definitely like the academic perspective to oppose, maybe not oppose, but to parallel Mother Abigail's spiritual perspective.
Yeah, and the book deals a lot with him trying to reconcile like prophetic dreams,
Right. Rationalize.
a supposed magician out in the west building up an army, and he still approaches that from a sociologist perspective, like, well, here's what we have going on, and this is how it can still fit into my worldview. And again, Mother Abigail just looks right at him and goes, "You ain't gonna solve this with sociology."
Yeah.
A lot of characters get that treatment.
Getting towards the end of book 2, it was building that something bad was going to happen at the end of book 2.
Mm-hmm.
Harold was planning something. Some people were probably going to die. I was really expecting Glenn or Ralph or characters like them to die as opposed to Nick.
Mm-hmm.
I was really surprised to see Glenn and Ralph included in that fellowship along with Stu and Larry sent off on their mission to Las Vegas to kill Randall Flagg. But, I'm also happy about it because I like Glenn's perspective. Glenn's perspective is probably very similar to where I would be in this position. So I'm happy to get more of him in book 3.
Yeah.
But as we wrap up talking about our Boulder characters, we're going to talk about Tom Cullen, but we're also going to use him as a vehicle to talk about the spies that the council sends to Las Vegas. So before we talk about that, just tell me a little bit, who is Tom Cullen?
Moon. That spells Tom Cullen. Was that mean? Was that too far?
If you didn't say it, I was going to say it. It's fine.
Tom is a what's the PC term for this now?
You could say
intellectually deficient, special needs,
mentally handicapped. Just as long as you don't say the R word.
I try to avoid that word. Stephen King doesn't.
No, he doesn't.
Stephen King drops hard R's in all the directions in this
hard
book.
R's and hard N's, all the time.
Again, product of its time.
Right.
I don't judge him for that. But sometimes, if you have certain sensibilities, you might not be able to get past the book.
Right.
He is a special needs adult who Nick finds
playing in the road with toy cars, right?
And he finds him drunk first because he wasn't allowed to drink before, but now everyone's dead, so why does he stop?
Right.
And then he sees Nick break into a pharmacy to get stuff to treat a wound.
So he breaks into a store and steals
toy cars. Yeah. And that's what sort of, when Nick sees that, he finally gets like, okay, this is the level I'm dealing with.
They're an interesting pair because Nick is deaf, dumb, and half blind.
Yeah.
And Tom is intellectually challenged. He's high functioning.
Yeah. He
can get his own food, he can take care of himself and live, but he can't process information he can't analyze things.
Yeah. He has to he has these moments where he'll blank out and his brain will get caught up with all the information that's been presented to him. Mm-hmm. That's how he figures out that Nick can't talk and can't hear.
Right.
Was he freezes there and his brain puts it all together. It's like having a bunch of jigsaw pieces and finally seeing where the corner pieces are.
Right.
And he finally puts it all together. He's a very kind-hearted individual, but he has issues. He has his own challenges.
But he also has kind of primal survival instincts.
Oh, yeah.
So one of my favorite parts in book 2 is where Nick and Tom are traveling and a tornado comes. Because, they're traveling in the Midwest. And Tom senses the tornado and gets them to a barn to safety. If Nick had not taken Tom in, the tornado would have killed Nick. Because he could not hear it coming. And it came from behind them, so he most likely would have died right there.
And Nick even makes it a point to say that he's never seen a tornado before.
Right.
He stood there staring at it for a minute, going like, what the heck is that thing?
And Tom's like, we go. Tom Collins says we go. It's like, all right, let's move.
Drags him into the basement. The dead family's down there.
Which is probably one of the scariest parts.
and the wind's blowing around, and they both kind of sense Randall Flagg in that moment.
They sense there's something else down there.
Yeah.
And that part kind of even reminded me of It.
Yeah.
Where it's one of those like gray scenes where, yeah, it's probably Randall Flagg is probably Pennywise, but it's something.
Yeah, it's something that they don't quite get.
Yeah.
And that's what terrifies them more than the body. It's a great scene.
Yeah, it is.
I'm wondering if either of the adaptations is going to have that scene in it.
I don't know. When we get to the adaptations, we're going to be watching those episodes together and then recording the episodes right afterward and kind of doing live reactions. So we're both really looking forward to that. Just real quick side tangent. Which one are you looking forward to more, watching the miniseries from the 1990s or the one from 2020?
The 1990s, because I have a soft spot for that sort of stage and how they made movies back then and miniseries back then. I'm a big fan of the Stephen King It miniseries.
Yeah.
Even with all the made-for-TV limitations it had.
Mm-hmm.
I feel limitations breeds creativity.
Yep.
When you give someone an almost unlimited budget, and it just doesn't feel the same.
Yeah, and it's a great, without getting down the tangent and the rabbit hole, it's a great example of that as well, because the 2017 It film had a smaller budget and a lot of restrictions on it, and probably came out with a better movie as compared to Part 2 from 2019, which had an infinitely larger budget and less restrictions. Granted, the source material Part 2 of that book is a lot wonkier.
And
but
while I'm not against adaptations making changes, you kind of have to.
Right.
These days, creators feel this almost compulsive need to go, this is my version of it.
Right.
I'm like, I don't want your version, I just want you to adapt the book.
And I'm happy to see a director's version of something, but I also reserve the right to not like it.
Yeah. And sometimes that even ends up being better. Examples of that might be few and far between, but that's my opinion of where I think my opinion on the miniseries will lie.
Right, and I'm also looking more forward to seeing the 90s one, not only because it's the original, but I also, I'm a big fan of the It miniseries, and the It miniseries was from 1990, and it kind of set the stage. It was so successful, it birthed all these other Stephen King miniseries from the 90s, Langoliers, Tommyknockers, The Stand, so on and so forth, and not all of those are great, but
they're fun to watch.
Yeah, some of them are bad, but I enjoy watching all of them. But okay, moving on. So we know a little about Tom. So as we've said, they eventually make their way to the free zone. All of our main characters set up this council in the free zone. They have these secret meetings at Stu and Fran's house, and they discuss, what they need to do to get society moving. But they also talk about Randall Flagg and the force that is building up in Las Vegas. And they decide that they need to be proactive. Mm-hmm. They need to get people on the inside, because also, for all they know, Flagg already has people inside of Boulder.
Yeah.
So they decide that they're going to send 3 people to Las Vegas separately as spies, knowing full well that probably none of them will ever come back. The first person they choose, well, not necessarily the first one, but we're going to talk about Dana, who we mentioned earlier, who's one of the people who's rescued from the quote-unquote sex zoo, which we'll talk more about later. Mm-hmm. They also, the judge.
The judge.
And Tom. So they choose an elderly man. The judge is like in his 70s.
I think they say he's like 73 or
yeah,
something.
And this is somebody they're sending to cross the Rocky Mountains and infiltrate Las Vegas, where essentially, as far as they know, the devil is building an army there. So they choose a 73-year-old man, a mentally handicapped adult who's probably, functionally maybe not even on a Forrest Gump level. Probably lower than that.
I would say he's definitely written to be lower than a Forrest Gump level.
And then Dana's great. Yeah, Dana's probably the perfect person to do it.
Yeah.
But it's very controversial. Now Nick is the one who says that he brings up Tom and Tom should go, and everybody initially is like, "You want to send the special needs guy as a spy?" And what were some of Nick's kind of reasons?
First of all, because they thought he wouldn't be expected.
Which is obviously, yeah, that's true.
The big thing, and we're gonna get into some pseudoscience here. They could hypnotize Tom into believing that
His cover story.
Yeah, into believing his cover story, so that if Tom believed it, even under torture, he wouldn't break. That would be true for him. Nick talks about how they tested I can't remember why they hypnotized him the first time. I guess just to see if they could do it, and they got him to stand on his head on commands. Mm-hmm. I guess they just wanted to fuck with him. I don't remember.
They were probably drinking. I don't know.
I'm sure there was a good reason for it.
There's mentioned at some point that somebody hypnotized him and he was susceptible to it.
Yeah, and again, very valid reason. If you're gonna send somebody in to spy, it's best if they don't believe they're a spy.
Right.
He could be hypnotized into knowing when he should come back.
Right. For somebody who has no ability to analyze and rationalize, if you burn into them a truth, they can't deviate from that.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at this from a purely intellectual standpoint, then he seems like probably the best candidate.
Yeah.
For me, and and Fran and Susan also had a hard time accepting this. It seems ghastly. Mm-hmm. As we said, you're sending a person to cross the Rocky Mountains by themselves, infiltrate one of the most infamous cities in the world, where a Antichrist-like figure is building this army of people who survived this plague and chose to go with the darker side of the two options. I am a parent of a special needs child, and it's hard for me to kind of set that aside when reading books. And so, of course, as I'm thinking about this, as I'm reading this part, I'm just thinking about sending my son across the Rocky Mountains as a spy to infiltrate Flag's position. And it was hard, but not in a way where I don't like that King wrote it, but I really like that it's in there, because this is one of the things in the entire book that made me think the most. Like, I spent a lot of time just dwelling on this one particular subject.
And I don't remember if the characters themselves bring it up, because again, this is a very thick book.
Yeah, a lot of pages, a lot of words.
And this was the first, maybe not the first, but this was probably one of the biggest examples of them compromising morals.
Right.
To fight the devil. Again, you're fighting fire with fire. Mm-hmm. The house is just going to burn down quicker. I don't remember... again, one of the many things Mother Abigail will later call them on is, you cannot win this using spies, you cannot win this using sociology, or with anything other than the tools you are being given. Right,
and they are essentially, they know that most likely who they send, all of them are probably going to die and not come back. They're banking on the off chance that one person will come back.
Yeah.
And so anybody they send, they're essentially saying, this person is expendable, we're okay with sacrificing this person for the larger good of the Boulder community.
Mm-hmm.
And choosing an old man and a special needs man, it's hard when you just say it out loud like that.
Yeah.
But the rationality that they give, it makes sense logically.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited to see what happens, not only with Tom and the judge, but with Dana too, because she's a cool character.
Yeah. And she was sort of the unexpected star for me.
Right.
The scenes that she was in. She hasn't been in a lot of scenes, but I liked what she was in.
Did you find a hard time, as hard a time as I did, believing that Stu really had no idea like what lesbians were? Like when she kisses, I forget the other girl. Did she kiss? Are her and Susan, Dana and Susan, in a relationship?
I don't remember.
She's in a relationship with another female character from Boulder.
Yeah.
And as she's leaving, she kisses the other woman, and Stu just has this like befuddled reaction.
I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah, like
Why's Peggy with me?
yeah, exactly. Like it's not Stu isn't homophobic so much as he's just ignorant.
Yeah. If this was an option, why would any woman choose dick?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe this is a very man thing to say, but like, if I were a woman, why would you even consider men an option?
Yeah.
Procreation, but nothing else. Like, what's the upside of being with a man? I'm saying that as a man. I don't know. All right. We have spent a long time on the characters from Boulder. So, moving on to Las Vegas. Randall Flagg. We don't get a lot of Randall Flagg.
He is, at least in the first two parts of this book, I know we have brought up Lord of the Rings a lot. He's just Sauron.
Yeah.
He's just the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, that's all he needs to be, and I'll get more into that when we start talking about some of the Lord of the Rings comparisons, because I got a whole tangent for that.
Yep. Good.
I love the nightmare scenes.
Yeah.
He chases, in their nightmares, chases Franny with a coat hanger because she's pregnant.
Yeah. Oh, that's a bad one.
Meets Stu in like a subway tunnel after he walks out of the quarantine, the research facility that they were holding him in
Vermont.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he dreams that he's stuck there, and he gets out and he goes down through a subway and he sees him there,
Mm-hmm.
and they only ever see him like grinning. There's no like facial details.
Right.
He's just the grinning man. He's the walking man, the dark dude.
Right.
He has a million nicknames, but he's might as well be called the bad guy.
And in the books, they don't really do this in the Lord of the Rings movies, but in the books, Sauron has a million names too.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's the enemy.
Yeah.
Primarily. But yeah, I mean, we don't get a lot about Randall Flagg as a character. He's more, so far, kind of a plot device more so than a character, which is surprising when you compare him to Mother Abigail, which is his rival.
And she's almost all character.
You get a lot of background on her. Did you like that first chapter on Mother Abigail where it goes into her past and her family's past and the farm? And
I think that was super interesting, mostly because you were getting this sort of perspective on what it might have been like to grow up as a black woman in, what was it, like 1923 South?
Yeah, or Midwest.
Yeah.
I like when King goes deep in one chapter on one character.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that chapter was not in the original version.
Oh, okay.
A lot of it comes in for the complete and uncut edition, which is what we're reading, is the full one. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Kind of reading reviews and listening to other podcasts about this book. One of the criticisms of book 2 is that chapter, and a lot of people think he goes too much into her past.
Honestly, I liked it.
No, I did too.
Yeah.
But it's weird that, they're kind of the two spiritual leaders of these two communities, and you get a lot on one and almost nothing on the other.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense if you know Randall Flagg from a broader King sense. If you know him from Eyes of the Dragon and the Dark Tower, then there are reasons why he isn't developed like other characters are in the story, but we'll talk more about that later. Okay, this is what I've been waiting to talk about the entire evening. Trash Can Man and the kid.
Ryan, how did we forget to bring up Trash Can Man last
for
time?
huge faux pas. We did not mention Trash Can Man in episode 1. Granted, he's only in one chapter of book 1. He's only in one chapter of book 2 as well, but so he is one of these kind of vignette characters in book 1. He's just real quick. He hasn't had a good life. And he likes to set things on fire.
Yeah.
And in the apocalypse, he decides he wants to burn entire cities.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that's a wrong answer. It's probably not the one I'd go for, but
yeah,
it's something.
I like to say, like, you don't know how you're going to react in a situation until you're in the situation.
No.
I like to think if I survived this apocalypse, I wouldn't decide to burn entire cities to the ground, but I don't know. Maybe I would.
He was such... I don't know if baffling's the right word, but he was super interesting to read. I'm going to get super crude here for a second. He sets a church on fire and gets arrested. And this is after a lifetime of setting mailboxes and trash cans and all sorts of things on fire.
Right.
Burning down the church is what finally sends him to jail. And he's sitting there in jail going, man, being molested and raped in my prison cell ain't so bad because at least no one's throwing rocks at me.
Right. Which is a very pragmatic way to survive prison.
Yeah. And I'm just sitting there going, how hard were those rocks, dude?
Okay, so he's one of the characters. He has the dreams, and he decides he wants to go to Las Vegas. He's kind of idolizing Randall Flagg, kind of making him this Christ-like figure that he wants to go and serve.
Yeah.
So he's on his way to Las Vegas, and he meets the kid. The kid. All of the kid is not in the original version of the book. He's a unique character to the uncut version.
And that is a crime because I love that chapter.
This is another thing that people don't like from this book. So the kid is a true, what's the word where they believe the entire world, he's the Patrick Hockstetter. The entire world revolves around them, and if they die, then the world becomes nothing.
Yeah, you know, as a guy with a psychology degree, I should know that, but I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Yeah, so he's completely caught up in his own world. He meets Trash Can Man. He takes a liking to him. He puts him in his car. They decide they're going to go to Las Vegas together. The kid tells Trash Can Man, you know, I see what this Flag guy is doing, but when we get there, I'm going to take over. I'm going to pretend like I'm on his team, and then bang, I'm going to take him out, and I'm going to be the leader. That's what I'm going to do. Hey, let's pull over into this motel. Let's stay for the night. I'm going to have a couple beers, and then I'm going to slip into your bed while you're sleeping, and I'm going to rape you by shoving my revolver up your ass.
I don't even know like how you discuss this without even just saying it. Yeah, he gets gun raped.
King is known for shocking sex scenes.
Yeah,
I think this one ranks up there pretty high.
and this is just like one of my favorite Japanese anime.
And even like, so when he gets in bed with Trash Can Man, and he tells him to jerk me off. He's like, all right, get in there and start jerking me off. And Trash Can Man, who's a prison veteran, and he's just like, okay, fine, whatever. And he's like, he doesn't mind.
This isn't the first guy I've jerked off.
Yeah, he's like, and even he's like, he kind of likes it. He kind of enjoys it.
Yeah, this isn't gonna be the first time I've been fucked in the ass. It doesn't matter.
And then the description of the inner dialogue from Trash Can Man as he's describing, oh, he's reaching around behind. Is he going to slip it in me? That's fine. This wouldn't be the first time somebody slipped it to me before. Is that his gun?
Can you believe that happy crappy?
Can you believe that happy crappy? And the kind of the most shocking part about it is Trash Can Man enjoys the barrel of the gun in his ass. I don't know. There's no real analysis, or at least I'm not.
I don't think there's any real analysis to this. I just love this chapter because it's so fucked up.
I mean, as deep a writer as King can be, he can also be super pulpy and super, shock writer. And
I don't think there's anything wrong with that when it's this effective because I remember this chapter.
I'm gonna remember this chapter till I die.
And it finally kills the kid off in one of the funniest ways I can think of. Just, I'm going to have you either starve to death in that van you're hiding in or be eaten by wolves.
Yeah, so Flag wants Trash Can Man to make it to Las Vegas because how Abigail sees certain people in her community as people who have a mission by God, Flag sees certain people in his community, like Lloyd and Harold and Nadine, as people who have a place in his armada, his army. He wants Trash Can to make it to the point where he sees the kid as a threat, and he sends a pack of wolves to separate the kid from Trash Can Man. The kid gets trapped in a van, and he has the choice to, like you said, starve to death in the van or leave the van and get ripped apart by wolves.
Yeah.
And one of the coolest parts in that chapter is where Trash Can Man realizes that the wolves are sent by Flag and they are not going to hurt him.
Yeah. You know, see, that's kind of creepy.
Mm-hmm. Very.
And you go from this really... it's disturbing in different ways. This really disturbing rape scene to this very sort of haunting, oh, do you want to be eaten or starved to death scene.
Right. I think that if I was an editor of this book and was looking for something to cut, as much as I do like the rape scene, I think that I know that sounds so bad, but I think the kid himself does contribute to the overall story in terms of Trash Can Man's development because of the scene with the wolves and the recognition that Trash Can Man realizes that he is meant to go to Las Vegas. Flag wants him to go. He's going to be an important figure in Flag's community. I think, just for that alone, that the kid needs to be in the story for at least that. I could see, I could see cutting
Parts of that chapter out. I don't know how they got away with cutting the whole chapter out.
I guess that I don't know how important Trash Can Man is in book 3, but I'm assuming in the original cut of the story, he's just a less important character. I don't know.
I mean, I guess we'll know once we finish. So.
Yeah. All right. So moving on. So here's your chance to talk about Harold. This is what you've been waiting for. Go ahead.
Okay. I was recently discussing this book with one of my coworkers, and she asked me who my favorite characters, and I was like I always say, I always have 2 of everything: Larry Underwood and Harold. And
Harold.
This coworker, a very lovely woman named Paula, who I will one day run off with and marry.
Looks at lady.
Yeah, looks at me and goes, Daniel, I do not understand. You need to explain that to me.
Has she read this book?
Oh yeah, she's read this book twice.
Huh. Okay.
She is a giant Stephen King fan.
Great. Hi, Paula.
And she remembers Harold. I don't know
how could you not?
Harold. And so I'm going to do my best to justify why I liked, this is going to be past tense now, Harold. I will try to keep this brief. I really like characters who are constantly confronted with a good option and a bad option, who are constantly given the chances to either be a good person or be a bad person. And I'm sitting there screaming at Harold throughout almost the entirety of book 2. You can stop, dude. You can just let it all go. He even mentions this several times. It keeps coming up. Oh, I'm losing weight because I stopped eating paydays out of spite. And people are recognizing me for my intelligence and how I've, even though I'm not on the committee, they liked my ideas that I put forward. I could stop. Oh, now I'm on this body disposing committee to help clean up this community, and people are giving me a nickname, and people are patting me on the back, and they like me around. I could stop with all this revenge plots just because the girl I liked didn't want to give me some I can still stop. There's still time. And I'm screaming at Harold this entire time. There is still time, Harold. There is still time to just do the right thing. And the reason I like him is because he has that conflict. Mm-hmm. He's not a great guy. He's not. That's why he's interesting. But he's not a great guy that has the chance to be a great guy. And then he doesn't do it. He doesn't do it. And I was so upset. I was like, dude, you could have stopped at any time.
Something we mentioned in the last episode is that prior to reading this book, we had a discussion where we thought that King's characters, as deep and detailed as they are, aren't usually very morally ambiguous. They're usually good people or bad people. And this book is proving to be an exception to this. Kind of Larry and Harold are kind of two sides of that coin, where they both kind of walk the line a little bit, and then Larry kind of falls to the good side, and Harold kind of falls to the bad side.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's built up, I think, just perfectly, because he gets every possible opportunity that he could ask for, to the point where Nadine tells him, "Oh yeah, they found your." Harold starts writing a journal, by the way, after he discovers Franny's journal.
Don't keep a journal.
Talking about what a big, fat, creepy piece of shit he is.
But he is. Possessive, creepy piece of shit.
And so he starts keeping a ledger of all the things he's going to make people pay for. And Nadine comes up to him and is like, "Oh yeah, they found your ledger. We need to go and finally kill everybody." And he looks at her and goes, "Oh, suppose I don't want to do that now, because now he has friends on this body disposal unit, and people are respecting him." And she's just like, "Dude, it's too late." It was probably too late like 5 steps ago. There's even a scene. Nadine, by the way, has to remain a virgin for Randall Flagg.
We'll talk to that when we get to the sex.
And there's just this scene where they're both like, "Oh, I could fuck her," and if he just would have fucked Nadine, it also would have ended.
He probably would have got it all out of his system.
And I'm sitting there, you would be surprised how much pussy will go towards a dude who is sexually frustrated. I tell you what, I have been there, dude. I understand, Harold, but my God, dude, you were given every chance, and I'm so upset.
Wow, I had like, as you were talking, I had like 5 things I wanted to say. And they're all just completely gone.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Kind of bringing Nadine into this, she kind of walks a similar road to Harold, where she's given choices where she can do this or that, and we want her to walk the right path, and she makes bad decisions. But with her, as opposed to Harold, where Harold seems to have more free will, Nadine's choices seem a little more predestined.
I would say, if they're not explicitly predestined, as close as you can get to predestined as it is.
Right. Where, as you mentioned, she is meant to be Randall Flagg's wife. She is a virgin character. She had one
only by the strictest definitions.
Right, exactly. But pre-Captain Trips, she came close to having sex once and didn't. Post-Captain Trips, she has sort of a relationship with Larry, but doesn't have sex with him when he approaches her, which kind of turns Larry off, and they kind of have a cold relationship. Larry ends up being with Lucy, who's a better fit for Larry and helps him make better decisions. And Nadine kind of progresses as they make it to the free zone, and everybody else is kind of going through the socialization process and becoming a part of the community. She kind of slowly becomes an outcast. When they get there, Larry, Lucy, Nadine, and the little boy Joe or Leo, they all get a house together, and Larry and Lucy have a relationship, and Nadine's just kind of the third wheel there because she was Joe's first surrogate parent. Where he calls her Nadine Mom, and then he also has Lucy Mom. One of these is in a relationship with Larry Dad, and one of them isn't. So she kind of gets pushed to the fringes of this new society and kind of sees Harold as her spiritual counterpart in all this. She becomes involved physically with Harold, which we'll talk about more in the sex segment. But she's forbidden from having vaginal intercourse with Harold. She can do whatever she wants, or rather Harold can do whatever he wants with her, except for that, because that's reserved for Flagg, because they are going to consecrate their marriage. And her story in book 2 kind of comes to a head where the only part of it where she kind of you feel like she has any choice is she decides to throw herself at Larry, and if Larry accepts her, then she'll expose Harold and his plans. She will become a member of Boulder. She will be part of the good. If Larry rejects her, she will go along with Harold's plan to blow up the council and leave with him and go to Las Vegas and become Randall Flagg's wife.
Yeah.
And similar to where you were talking about with Nick, where Nick made a good decision with the information he had to exclude Harold from the committee, ended up being a bad decision because he didn't know that
He
Harold...
didn't have all the information.
Right.
Yeah.
Larry does the same thing where he makes a good decision with the information he has. We can tell that Lucy is better for him.
He makes the moral decision based off of his character arc. In terms of utility, like who would suffer the least.
Right.
But he didn't have the calculator for this exact equation, so
He did not know the stakes that were on the table. He didn't know that if he accepted Nadine, then she was going to come forward about what Harold was doing, and they'd get to stop this, which would in turn save Nick and save Susan.
Yeah.
But
and in terms of themes of religion, you got stuff like destiny and stuff like that, you know. You also have a lot of things that play into that, like self-fulfilling prophecies. Harold is always looking for things to bitch about,
right,
to find fault in. Oh, this is how they're making fun of me. Same thing with Nadine when she goes to Larry. She goes to him at the exact moment when he's finally kind of happy. He's in this relationship with this woman, and she's not she doesn't explain the stakes. Because if she explains the stakes, then it might go a different way.
Right.
So she does it at the worst possible time, in the worst possible way, and it's probably on purpose.
Probably. I think we're probably going to have a lot more on Harold and Nadine in book 3.
I hope so.
I would imagine. I'm afraid that Nadine is going to replace Fran as the primary female character in the last part of this book, but
yeah,
we'll see what happens. All right, and then wrapping up our characters, just a brief mention on Lloyd, who in book 1 kind of became the right-hand man of Randall Flagg. We see a little bit more of him when the trash can man makes it to Las Vegas. Lloyd kind of presents himself as the number 2 and helps Trash Can Man get adjusted. And the significant part about this portion of the story isn't so much anything about Lloyd, it's that you get to see that the people in Las Vegas aren't really villains.
Yeah, I mean, they're just people.
They're people.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe they made the wrong decision to go to Las Vegas as opposed to Boulder, or maybe they sided with the team where they felt like they had the better chance of surviving a conflict.
Yeah, with Lloyd, it's specifically to have the key to society.
Right.
There's a whole analogy there for him.
And if you think about it, of all the characters we've talked about, they all had the dreams. Am I going to Boulder? Am I going to Las Vegas? Lloyd is the only character who didn't have a choice, or at least a choice between those two cities, because he was locked in his prison cell, and Randall Flagg said, "I will let you out if you join me." So Lloyd's choice wasn't between Boulder or Las Vegas. Lloyd's choice was between starving to death in this prison cell or going with the devil. And who would not have made the same decision? Job, okay. Job, you're right. Job would not have, but I'm not Job, you're not Job, and neither is Lloyd.
Yeah, Lloyd is definitely not Job, and I would have joined Flagg about 10 steps before that.
Yeah, and you get to see Lloyd kind of ease the trash can man into their social group, and they're welcoming to him, and they come and join us for breakfast, and they're friendly to him and they're nice to him, which is something Trash Can Man has never experienced. And he was already fanatical about Flagg, but now he's also being loyal to the group, because these are the first people in the history of his life that are just being nice to him.
Yeah.
All right. So We just spent an hour talking about all these characters. What was the scariest part of book 2 for you?
The crucifixion scene.
So, taking it back to Lloyd, where, Flag's like, you can rot in this cell and starve to death, or you can come with me. Trash Can Man is put in a similar position where he's like, if you want to be a part of this community, you gotta help us literally crucify this guy.
Yeah, this dude that you were talking with and joking with just the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And the biblical themes get a little on the nose there, where Trash Can Man's looking at him and going, I don't know you. Okay.
His crime was using drugs?
Yeah, apparently if you join the devil, you're not allowed to use drugs. You can't freebase.
Okay.
So I guess rock and roll and drugs are for heaven now.
Yeah, I don't think they ever address it in Boulder, but surely if you want to smoke a little pot, they'd be okay with it.
I mean, they mentioned people walking around the streets drunk, just because there's not much law and order.
For me, the women who are kept by the small group of men and drugged and used as sex slaves, that was super spooky. And I'll tell you, the part of that story that really got me is after they get rescued by Stu and Franny and Harold and Glenn, and they're at the camp and they're safe and they're telling everybody about it, and the one girl describes, I forget the character's name, I'm just gonna say Bob.
Yeah, they're not that important.
Yeah, so she's like, I always hoped for Bob because all Bob ever wanted was a blowjob.
Yeah.
And like, it's so sad that she's put in this position where she has to hope for the guy that is going to make her give him a blowjob.
Yeah, that was pretty messed up.
Because that's the lesser of the two evils that she's going to experience. Who knows what kind of sick shit all the other guys made her do.
Well, they did mention using barbed wire to sodomize somebody.
Yeah, and
So.
they take any women they found, little girls, old women, but they only had enough drugs to keep like 5 or 6 of them at a time. So when they found somebody who was more attractive to them, they would kill who was ever at the bottom of their list.
They specifically mentioned that the leader of the men did not want to travel with 13 people.
Right.
So,
oh yeah.
So he would always kill somebody off if they picked someone up.
That's right. I think there were 6 guys and 6 slaves.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was, and part of why that was so scary is because shit like that actually happens. Like, people are actually sold into sexual slavery in real life, and it's that specific situation was kind of exacerbated by the fact where these people weren't operating in the shadows. They were just driving around in a convoy picking up women as they found them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was super scary for me. Another one that I thought was scary that we mentioned earlier was the basement scene in the barn where they find the dead bodies, but then Nick and Tom also sense that there's something else down there.
Yeah.
We discussed that.
I found a lot of the nightmares unsettling.
Right.
I have perpetual nightmare. I can't remember the last night I had where I didn't have a nightmare.
Yeah, I've been having a lot of nightmares recently too.
So, a lot of them hit kind of close to home because King is very good at structuring a nightmare how an actual nightmare feels.
Yeah. I would imagine he has a lot of nightmares himself.
Yeah.
But on the whole, even though there are some very scary things in book 2, I would say that it is less scary.
It is significantly less scary. In my opinion, scares take a back seat to propelling the journey and some of the character development, which that's not wrong.
Right.
The more you care about a character, the more horrifying it's going to be when something bad happens to them.
I would rather have quality of scares over quantity of scares anytime.
Yeah. It's the book equivalent of not having boo scares or jump scares.
Right.
It's building up tension.
Yeah, and book 1 has a lot of scary parts because book 1 has got to hook you in. And now in Act 2 here, we're kind of building on the characters and building towards the final conflict in Act 3. This book was more about the parallelism between the two communities, the good and the evil, and getting our main characters to a point when they're ready for that final conflict. It was less about the spooky scares.
Yeah.
Although one I did want to mention was the part where Mother Abigail is walking back from her neighbors in the dark and she gets assaulted by all the weasels.
Yeah.
That was kind of silly, but it was kind of spooky.
I liked how she started invoking the name of Jesus against the weasels.
I mean, if Flag sent them, sure.
I wanted to do Randall Flagg for this Halloween, and my friends told me if I wore a jean jacket, I'd look too much like a pedophile, so I scrapped the idea.
So, we had a virtual Halloween party at work today.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to decorate pumpkins and wear costumes. I was going to wear a plague doctor mask. And Becca told me that might be seen as in poor taste. So I didn't. I got a Batman mask, I wore a Batman t-shirt, and I put on a cape.
Did someone else wear a plague doctor mask?
Here's what happened. I was like, okay, I'll be budget Batman. So I log on to the meeting. I see what everybody else is wearing. Somebody else is wearing a plague doctor mask. I take off the Batman mask. I run and get the plague doctor mask. I put it on. I log in. And my boss says, she sees me. I'm wearing a Batman t-shirt, a cape, and a plague doctor mask. And she's like, Brian, I don't know a lot about Marvel, but are you supposed to be Batman? I then immediately take off the plague doctor mask and put the Batman mask back on. That was my morning.
Your morning was better.
Yeah. Okay. Any other scares in book 2? Probably not.
No. I think we covered the best ones.
Okay, so getting on to least favorite parts, criticisms, what you would change. I have a big one. I really like book 2 in its entirety, but then kind of after finishing it and looking at it as a whole, a huge part of the story is building the themes of good versus evil. And we see basically no development of Las Vegas and the people in Las Vegas other than the last half of the Trash Can Man chapter.
Yeah.
And I would like to have seen more of a, maybe not even equal time spent in both cities, but more of Las Vegas and more about Lloyd and Trash Can Man and the other people there and what's going on. Because maybe King's decision was he wanted to be more of a mystery.
Yeah.
But I thought we could have used more of that, even if it meant the book being a little bit longer.
I can agree with that. I would have liked to have seen more over there, especially after the crucifixion.
Yeah.
Because after I realized they can't do drugs over there, I've been sitting around going, what are the rules? What are the rules for the
right? I mean,
Vegas?
Do they drink? Do they have?
Is rock and roll banned by the devil?
Surely not.
Is there no sex over there?
Surely not, because at least Randall Flagg will have sex when.
Yeah, but is he the only one?
Oh, I don't know. Do you think that we're gonna get like a vivid sex scene between Flagg and Nadine?
I guarantee it.
Yeah.
If we don't get that, I will be super disappointed. It'll be the last King book I fapped it.
Do you have any? What was your least favorite part of book 2?
I know this is a common criticism with spending all this time on the committee and stuff and building up Boulder. I didn't dislike any of that, but they spent, what would you say, like 300 pages?
A lot of time on it.
Building up the community and what needs fixed and how they're fixing it and what they're going to. Only for Mother Abigail to come back and go, yeah, none of this shit matters. You guys need to go on a journey. So I'm sitting there going, so I just read a bunch of useless information for 300 pages.
So this is where, so I liked all of that.
Yeah, I liked it when I was reading it.
Even if it doesn't matter, this is what I would say to Mother Abigail. Yeah. Even if this doesn't matter in terms of our confrontation with Flagg, you're right there. But if we're going to have a society after we beat Flag, it's going to matter then.
Well, she also told him, you guys might not beat Flag. It might be God's will that we all lose and die.
Right, but if we don't plan for us to win, then what's the point of...
Yeah, but then what was the point of me sitting there reading it? I was like... I was like, they spent so much time on the generator and getting the power back on, and I understand it's showing life in a post-apocalyptic society building itself back up. And I didn't dislike reading any of it, but I'm left wondering, why did we spend so much time on it? If that was going to be your message, maybe that was the point, was I need to spend all this time just so I could tell you it didn't matter.
Right. Exploring other people's opinions on this book, that is probably kind of the universally complained about thing about book 2, is so much time spent on the committees. I have a different opinion to you. Like, it doesn't bother me. Like, I was willing... I wasn't unhappy with having spent that much time on it, but maybe part of that is also the different mediums we are using. You're reading a physical book. I'm listening to the audio book. Most of the time when I'm listening to it, I'm also working, cleaning the house, working out. So maybe I didn't have to dedicate my time to actually sitting down and focusing on those pages the way that you did. So maybe I would be more upset about it if I actually was reading a physical book and like, I just spent 3 hours reading this and now it doesn't matter. So I can see that.
None of it's written poorly. It's just, again, I'm left wondering, okay, what was the point of this? Some of it matters, like you got to build up Harold and his resentment towards the committee. So it's not like none of it matters.
And also the spies, sending the spies, that all comes out in the committee meetings.
Yeah, but I feel like you probably could have cut some of it.
And that, moving on, I think the other criticism we have of book 2 that we both share is that we've already discussed in detail is Fran. And I don't think we need to go back into that, but I think that's the other thing that we weren't particularly happy with about book 2.
It just, I don't know, man. It just felt like he didn't know what to do with her after a certain point.
Right. Like,
she's just now the pregnant character, and she's worried about the baby. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of a story arc.
Right.
It just...
It's not where she started.
Yeah.
We were introduced to her as kind of a woman who don't need no man, and she was going to have her own story, and her story was going to involve her having this baby without being in a relationship in an apocalypse. And then she latches herself onto Stu. Granted, if I were her, I would latch onto Stu too, because Stu's a great guy. I'd be all about that. But
I mean, your choices were Stu and Harold.
Yeah, give me some Stu.
Daniel the feminist here complaining about the female characters.
Right. And so talking about King and his process a little bit, from all that I've learned reading articles and listening to him talk, he doesn't plan out his writing in a way where some people would say, okay, I'm going to have this character and they're going to have this story arc. I'm going to start them in this place. They're going to have this, they're going to move to this position, and then this is where I want them to end up. He's more of the writer who just sits at his computer and just lets it go.
He mentioned that in the I don't know if your audio had the forward.
Yeah.
He mentions that one page at a time. That's
Right.
how he writes. I can appreciate that's how I write.
Right, same. And so it makes sense that some characters are, when you write that way, some characters are not going to have a complete arc.
And they might not be the way that a reader might want.
Right.
And that just that happened. That's going to happen with any book, really.
And I would rather him write that way and have an amazing story that maybe has a few disappointments than to get a ball in his head and think, okay, plan out the whole story and then sit down to write it, and it probably wouldn't turn out as good.
Yeah, if my biggest complaint is Franny feels incomplete, I think it's doing a good job.
Right. And again, we haven't read book 3, so maybe we're going to come back in episode 3 and go, you know that all that time we spent complaining about Fran in episode 2, well, we wasted your time.
Yeah.
The people who've read the book are screaming at us right now, shut up, you two, and go on to the next thing. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so sex in the stand. There's a lot more sex in it.
There's a lot more sex in this book.
So those Harold and Nadine scenes, hot or not?
Anything with Harold is hot to Daniel.
You can do anything except for that.
You can do anything but fuck me in the and you know, for most guys that seems like a trip.
Yeah.
But for Harold, who is a virgin, again by the strictest definition.
So I don't know how detailed we want to get into this and sex and the progression of being a teenager and your first sexual experience, but I guess it's true that most teenage guys want to jump to vaginal intercourse pretty quickly. I don't know. I don't feel like my sexual journey was typical of most teenagers. But so it's hard for me to kind of put myself in Harold's position. I feel like if I was 17 and I had a woman who told me I could do anything but that, I would probably be happy with that.
Yeah, I think I would be very happy.
But maybe, talking to some of my friends who were more sexually active in high school, maybe they wouldn't be. I don't know. It's a hard thing to talk about.
I think it's part of it is he's told that it's the one thing he's not allowed to do. So of course that's the thing.
You want to do it exactly. Yeah. Like if she said, "Okay, you can do whatever, but no butt stuff."
Yeah.
Then all you can think about is butt stuff.
All you can think about is butt stuff after that. All you can think about is the happy crappy and the revolver. Mm-hmm. And even for Nadine, she's sitting there like thinking in her head, does this guy really think anything he's doing is doing anything for me? I wish he would just stick it in me.
Is there any point where King writes that she's enjoying what's going on?
No, in fact, he actively writes that she's not enjoying it, that she's sitting there faking it, wishing that he would just actually fuck her.
Right.
And, even, apparently he's not good at giving head.
Well, nobody is initially.
I guess, I don't know how much time he had to practice, I guess. I shouldn't be so judgy towards my poor Harold.
Right, and I don't, even if he practiced every day for 2 weeks, I don't think it's something you can learn in that amount of time. We shouldn't be talking about this. How long does it take to be good at giving head? I don't know. Does it take years? Can you go to Master Roshi's school of going down on somebody and do the super milk delivery training method and be good at it in 2 weeks? I don't know.
We'll poll the audience.
We'll poll the audience. Okay, so you're going to get our socials at the end of the episode. So tweet at us, Instagram at us, tell us how long does it take to be good at giving head for both, for both sexual organs. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so we also get a lot of sex between Stu and Fran, but theirs is a little more intimate.
Yeah.
It's more, as much complaining as we did about how that relationship kind of deflates her story, their relationship in and of itself is kind of sweet.
Yeah. My favorite part of their sexual exploration is when Harold walks in on them. Again, a little bit more Daniel lore for you people. I don't know if you guys have ever walked in on the person you have the biggest crush in the world on fucking somebody else, but it's not great.
I've not personally had that experience, but yeah, not something I would ever want to do. Not on my bucket list.
Not on your bucket list.
No, certainly not. But yeah, so Stu and Fran are kind of the one side of the sex coin where it's more committed, it's more emotional, it's more intimate, and then Harold and Nadine are the other side where it's purely physical.
Yeah.
To the point where one of them doesn't even enjoy it.
Yeah. And Harold even makes a point after he blows everybody up. Oh yeah, no, I'm done with you. I'll go over there, and Flag will give me a new woman, and I'll get to fuck her in the pussy.
That's so bad. How bad do you think Harold's end is going to be? It's got to be horrendous.
Stephen King is, at least from the books I've read, he's what I would call a vengeful writer.
Yeah.
The bad guys get theirs.
Yes.
And it usually hurts.
Yeah, it's got to be bad.
It usually hurts a lot, and I'm like, he built a pipe bomb, well, not just a pipe, it was a big bomb. Killed all of these people after, just basically using a woman as a sex toy for weeks.
Yeah.
And stalking a girl who didn't want anything to do with him, was obsessed with her. I can't imagine it being good. It's like gonna be like, probably be like Elliot Rodgers, like fucking botched suicide.
Oh my gosh. Moving on to Religion in the Stand. And we've talked a lot about this throughout the episode. We've talked about Job, the duality of good and evil, physical geographic barrier of the Rocky Mountains between Las Vegas, Nevada and Boulder, Colorado, being also a metaphoric line drawn in the sand between these are the good guys, and these are the bad guys. This is also something that is very reminiscent of The Lord of the Rings. If reading those novels, Sauron and his armies are always referred to as the evil that's in the east. Mm-hmm. Sauron controls the east. The free peoples of Middle Earth, specifically the men, being Gondor and Rohan, are referred to as by Aragorn as the men of the West. There's a geographic divide between the bad guys in the East and the good guys in the West. In the Stand, it's reversed, where the bad guys are in the East and the good guys are in the West. But it's the exact same sort of using geography as a metaphor for a line in the sand. If you're on this side of the country, you're good. If you're on this side of the country, you're bad. And it's a very explicit way of showing that duality between this group is good and this group is bad.
Yeah.
Is it on the nose? Did you make that connection?
Yeah, I haven't read Lord of the Rings, as you've criticized me for several times.
You suck.
But I have read a lot about Lord of the Rings and a lot about Tolkien.
We call that Wikipedia University.
I find him very fascinating in the way that he approached storytelling. And one of the things that he wrote about pretty extensively was applicability. He liked to write his novels to be as applicable to any situation as possible. And one of those ways you can do that is having very defined good and evil tropes. This is the bad guys over here, this is the good guys over here. Allegory tends, or at least in his view, tended to fall apart. If these guys were supposed to specifically be the Nazis, then as soon as you had them not do a Nazi thing...
He famously did not like allegory.
Yeah, he wanted his novels to be applicable to multiple situations.
Right. He wrote his books very like Bible tales.
Yeah.
With good guys and bad guys, and you should learn a lesson from it, but I'm not trying to say that this is something else. Like, people would ask him, what is the Lord of the Rings about? Is it an allegory for World War II or for European colonialism? And he would say, the Lord of the Rings is about an evil ring made by an evil deity and good guys trying to destroy that ring. That's what it's about.
And I think The Stand does a very good job of emulating this. Mm-hmm. Captain Trips, for example, could be anything. Randall Flagg could be anybody. That's the thing to get the good guys into action against the bad thing.
Right. King definitely uses allegory
a lot more than
Tolkien. But this book is more of, I mean, obviously it's an allegory for good and evil.
Yeah.
But
not as specific good and evil.
Right. It's other than maybe Christian good and evil, but that's how Mother Abigail interprets it.
Yeah.
If you know Randall Flagg from other King's works, you know that his deal is bigger than he's the Christian devil.
Yeah.
Without getting into spoilers from the Dark Tower series or anything else, he's a bigger deal than that.
Yeah.
But the religious themes in this book are extremely similar to the things that Tolkien explores in his novels, and specifically The Lord of the Rings.
And Tolkien was a pretty religious dude himself.
Extremely religious. But it's similarly to Stephen King.
Yeah.
Tolkien was very spiritual, but not huge into organized religion.
Yeah.
Very similar to King.
And I think it works in the book's favor when I'm assuming it works in Lord of the Rings' favor. It works in the Stand's favor. With the people in Las Vegas, they don't have to be the Nazis to be the bad guys. They're just the bad guys. Somebody might compare them to the Nazis at some point, but that's just one character's perspective on trying to rationalize and make this reasonable to themselves.
Right.
When in terms of the book's universe itself, it's bigger than that.
Right. And it's the same thing in Lord of the Rings where, Sauron basically controls everything on the eastern side of the map. There are other kingdoms of men. Specifically, there's the Easterlings who live in the far eastern part of Middle Earth.
The best part.
Yeah. And then there's the Haradrim, who, if you've seen the movies, those are the people with the elephants who live in like the southeastern part of Middle Earth. And these are just the bad guys. And that's all you need to know to read and process the story. If you get really deep into the lore and you read the Silmarillion and the appendixes, you can find out there's a bigger story to them and that, there's more to it than that. But just for the story, they don't have to represent anything other than they're the minions of Sauron.
That was the tangent that I had been wanting to go on that. So
yeah, and I like geography, and it's weird, but I've always liked Tolkien for his use of geography in his stories and how important rivers and mountain ranges are. And I love how King uses the Rocky Mountains as a barrier between these two groups of people in this story. It just makes the social scientist in me just want to nerd out super hard, and that's weird, but that's what I'm into. Okay, so as we're starting to wind down here, just some mentions and some references to some of King's other work in Book 2 of The Stand. So Mother Abigail has sort of a telepathic power.
Mm-hmm.
And she said one of her grandparents had it as well, and their grandparents called it the shining light of God. So, and this is essentially, that means she has the shine.
Yeah.
She has telepathic abilities the same way that Danny Torrance has.
She called it shining.
she called it shine. And then we also, speaking more about psychic kids, Leo, or Joe, also probably has the shine, because he actually has a premonition of not specifically what Harold is going to do, but that something bad is going to happen, and he tells Larry about it.
Yeah, and he also had just like a bad vibe. He didn't even want to go near Harold's house.
Right. Yeah, when he saw Harold for the first time, he froze.
Yeah.
And he's like, Larry, I'm not going in there.
Maybe we should start bringing psychic children around incels and...
Yeah. Fun one. The exact number of people in Larry's group when they made it to Boulder was 19. If you're not familiar with it, 19 is the magic number in Stephen King's books. 19 shows up all over the place. Anytime you're reading a Stephen King book and a number comes up, look to see if it's not 19, if the different numerals in the number, do they add up to 19, or it comes up all the time. That's a fun. And another one. So Gina is a little girl in Ralph's group when they are at Mother Abigail's house and everybody's kind of telling their stories. Gina has a broken leg because she fell out of a hayloft she was playing in. And this is a reference to one of Stephen King's short stories from Night Shift, The Last Rung on the Ladder, which is a dramatic story about a brother and sister who are playing in a hayloft when they're not supposed to, and the sister falls from the hayloft, and then it's about the consequences of that. One of Stephen King's best short stories. Highly recommend The Last Rung on the Ladder, but Gina's definitely a reference to that. And then just kind of as we're winding down here, let's kind of wrap up with our closing thoughts on book 2. Go ahead, Daniel.
Overall, I enjoyed it. It's not as intense as book 1.
Right.
Book 1 really gets you in with its hooks and drags you down and makes you afraid of everything.
Everything.
It made me start wearing my mask a little bit better.
Yeah.
No more diaper chinning for Daniel.
Make sure it's over my nose.
Yeah. Book 2 gives you a little bit more character development, which I really enjoy. You start to get a feel for the journey and the stakes that are really at play. And you might not think that 99% of the human population can be outstaked, but it gets outstaked. You're dealing with things like destiny and good and evil as metaphysical concepts, and it really starts to hit you on the nose with it. And you get to see a lot of that. I enjoyed it.
I think my enjoyment of the book overall really increased in book 2.
Yeah.
As I said during our wrap up on the last episode, I really like book 1, but just looking at it on its own, I don't think that it compared to a lot of King's other early novels, Salem's Lot, The Shining. I think after reading book 2, I think we're getting close. I'm getting closer to seeing why it's considered such a classic and such a staple of his bibliography. Of course, we'll have to see how it wraps up in book 3. I might come back next time and say, oh, this book sucks, don't read it. Probably not, but I'm definitely liking a lot more. And that's probably says more about me and me as a reader. I really like character development. Character development is important to me. I like character-driven stories. I like plot-driven stories too. My favorite stories are ones that have both strong plot and strong characters. I like to have my cake and eat it too. But book 2 really got me more invested in all of these characters except for Fran.
except for Fran.
Except for Fran. And I guess Nick. Oh God, I'm making myself feel bad. But anyways, I'm very excited to start book 3. I'm probably going to listen to just a smidge of it tonight, but I'm going to get through a lot of it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And any other final thoughts on book 2 of The Stand?
No, I think we covered just about everything.
All right, well, we are going to wrap it up here. Please join us next time where we'll be covering book 3 of The Stand before we move on to the adaptations. Hi, Sheldon. And, oh, I remembered real quick. One of the things I thought about during your Harold rant.
Oh, yeah.
Real quick. To put Harold's journal in modern pop culture terms.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's basically Sheldon Cooper's enemy list from The Big Bang Theory.
You nerd.
Basically, yes. Just saying. Okay. All right. Sorry. Join us next time for book 3. After that, we'll be getting into the adaptations, and after that, we'll be starting our next book, which we already have a plan for our next couple books, but we are more than happy to take suggestions for books we're going to do in the future. So if you're enjoying the show and there's stuff you want us to cover, you're going to hear our socials after this. So hit us up through our various social media platforms. Give us suggestions for books, also short stories or movies, anything horror related. we would like to consider it for something we could cover in the future. But thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Daniel, for joining me again.
Anytime, Ryan.
Well, that was horrendous. I would tell you boys good job, but the dryness of my sarcasm would likely evaporate all the moisture in both your bodies. Anyway, if you want to hear more of this, please subscribe to their YouTube channel by searching for The Horror of Babylon. You can follow them on Twitter at HorrorPod69. The Facebook page is under The Horror of Babylon. And on Instagram, these fools are The Horror of Babylon, one word. Reach their assuredly empty inbox at The Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. You can also request their Discord server link via any other channel. And finally, if you are foolish enough to support this abomination financially, search for The Horror of Babylon on patreon.com. And God save your soul if you do.